This budget, Minister, has been very much a non-event for most people out there. Whatever has been given has been taken away somewhere else, and that's really the experience of most people when they look at what's happened. In agriculture, which is mainly the brief that I look after, we see that there has been additional money given to some sectors of it. However, we are in a time when farming is under huge pressure, when particularly the beef sector are suffering with some of the worst prices that they've ever had. And while that's outside the budget remit, the reality is, and I had questions this morning with the Minister for Agriculture, the reality is that the government and the Minister is inclined to shrug their shoulders and turn their back when it comes to providing for the small farmer and the farming community out there. And we find that particularly when we see the prices that's been returned. The Minister said it's not his place to set prices. But yet, this state, through its taxpayers, invest hundreds of millions of euros every year in Board BIA and other agencies to promote Irish food, to market Irish food abroad. We have delegations going all over the world to get new trade deals for us that Irish food can be exported. And back at home, the farmers that's producing that food are on the breadline. So clearly, if the state is putting such an amount of funds into marketing these produce, there is an obligation on the state to ensure that the people who are the primary producer get a fair return for it. And that's across all sectors, but particularly across our agriculture and our fishing sector. The average farm income is continuing to fall and has continued to fall for the last number of years. The measures that the government put in, I think it comes to 52 million. I think only 44 million of that is actually specified in agriculture where it's going to be spent. In our pre-budget submission, we said that we would spend 62 million in the agriculture sector. And that was without having an additional billion, which the government found only the night before the budget. So if we had an additional billion in the coffers, we would certainly be proposing that we put an enhanced package in place for the Irish agricultural sector, particularly to support the small farmers and the small family farm. In the rural development section, the government has said that there will be an additional 53 million in the next capital year of funding. And this is money that has already been announced and already been clearly earmarked through the National Development Plan. And yet it's wheeled out again as if it's new money. So there are serious questions to be asked as to where the government is going in respect of this. We also have, of course, the issue which is one of the big issues in many parts of rural Ireland is Brexit, and what's going to happen in respect to that. Again, the government puts in place a tiny amount of money to look after the Brexit sector, to ensure that people can prepare for the impact of what Brexit is going to do, and particularly in the border and in the northwest and the Alaska here, like you'd understand this, particularly in your constituency. Brexit will have an immense impact. And yet the government seems to just say, well look, we're engaged in negotiations, but there's no hard cash on the table, and that's what small businesses out there need to ensure that they can survive through the very volatile time that's coming ahead. The other issues that affect rural Ireland, and there are many of them, and I see that the Minister particularly in regard to disabilities, and people who live with a disability in rural Ireland live with a double disadvantage, because they cannot even access the services that are there. Many of them can't travel to the services that are there. I had discussions earlier this week with Minister Halligan about school bus services, and I welcome the additional money that's been put in there. I think there's 7 or 8 or 9 million put into school bus services, but when I speak to Minister Halligan about it, he tells me most of that will actually be for special needs children to get them to the particular places that they need to go. So the real school bus service that we need to see put in place is for rural children to get to school. And unfortunately, that's been withdrawn by continuous rules all the time that keep changing. So the children, if you live up a road and there's less than 10 children on the road, the bus won't go up the road. If you have this up the road, that won't happen. If you have the other won't happen. If you're not near your closest school, you can't get to school. These are affecting people across all of rural Ireland. And not only is it about the children getting to school, but it's also the ability of the parents to get to work. Because if you have children getting to school and you can't get a school bus, clearly you can't have a job because you have to go and collect them and you have to bring them to school. So you have all of these issues, and yet when the government had an additional €1 billion, and when we produced our alternative budget, we didn't have that €1 billion, and yet we were able to put money in place for all of those things. So you just wonder, where is the priorities here? The priorities clearly aren't in housing either. We have a crisis in housing across the whole country. The priority isn't in health. The health crisis is continuing, and there isn't sufficient resources being put in place. So we need to see a budget which actually delivers for the people, rather than delivering for the vested interests, because that seems to be the continual charge that this government is going to do. They're going to look after those who are already well looked after.